Jonia Berry. She was born on August 26, 1983, in this small American town called Bristol, Tennessee. She was just she was a really happy and friendly person, the kind who had like a ton of friends and just genuinely loved to have fun at parties. When she was in high school, she was even part of the local cheerleading team, believe it or not. After finishing high school, Jonia went to East Tennessee State University to study psychology and criminology. And while she was there, she met this guy, Jason White, and they became a couple. They actually ended up getting engaged right before they graduated. Then, in late 2004, Jonia, who was 21 at the time, decided to go for her master's degree in psychology. This meant she had to move temporarily to Knoxville, another city, obviously for her studies. While she was there, she took on a part-time job at a children's educational center, and that's where she really truly discovered her passion for helping kids. Her boyfriend, Jason, he was still studying in a different state, working toward his law degree. But even though they were far apart, they seriously stayed in touch constantly and were actively planning their wedding. Now, in Knoxville, Jonia initially stayed at her friend Jason Amami's apartment. They'd both gone to college together, and then later, both moved to Knoxville. They were sharing this two-bedroom place, and Jason was just letting Jonia crash there until she could find her own spot. Jonia actually had two part-time jobs going on, one at a jewelry store and the other at a children's hospital. So on Sunday night, December 5th, after finishing her shift at the jewelry store, Jonia went to the mall to do some Christmas shopping. When she got back to the apartment, she wrapped presents for the kids at the educational center, she talked to her neighbor for a bit, and then she just went to her room. She even spoke to her boyfriend on the phone right before she went to bed. Then, around 4 in the morning, Jason Imami heard a woman scream. At first, he just figured Jonia was having a bad dream, so he went to her room. But instead, what he found was this complete, utter stranger holding a knife. The guy attacked Jason, and they had this terrifying struggle. Jason finally managed to push the attacker away and just absolutely bolted out of the apartment. He ran to the nearest convenience store, which was almost a kilometer away, to call for help. When the store clerks saw Jason, who was, believe me, covered in blood, they immediately called 911. When the police arrived, Jason, shaken, explained what had happened. They went to the apartment and found Jonia in the hallway that connected 5 apartments. She was still alive, but just barely conscious. When they asked her about the attacker, all she could give them were just a few extremely weak clues. The police searched the entire building and the surrounding area, but they just couldn't find the guy. They rushed Jonia to the nearest hospital, but the doctors, despite trying absolutely everything, couldn't save her. The doctors reported that she had sustained more than 18 out of 20 stab wounds. Honestly, it was just highly, highly unlikely she could have survived that. As for Jason, he had 8 wounds from the attacker, but thankfully only one was really serious. He got medical help and his life, thankfully, was not in danger. Meanwhile, the detectives immediately started their investigation at the crime scene. They found blood in the hallway, which, indicated that Jonia had tried to get help from her neighbors, but no one had opened their doors. Can you even imagine that? Right next to Jonia's room, they found the murder weapon, which, get this, turned out to be a kitchen knife that actually belonged to Jason. The attacker had used it with such incredible force that it was actually bent and severely damaged. Police also found blood near the back door of the apartment and on the stairs leading to the street. Since Jason and Jonia had left through the front door, the detectives figured the killer most likely escaped through the back. In Jason's room, they discovered another crucial clue, a partial footprint, which the attacker might have left when he was following Jason and attacking him. Because of the sheer brutality of how the attacker took Jonia's life, the police quickly suspected the motive was deeply personal. At first, honestly, they even looked at Jonia's boyfriend, even though he was 1,000 kilometers away from Knoxville. But all his friends and family emphatically stated that he and Jonia had a wonderful relationship, and he had absolutely no reason to commit such a cruel crime. He found out about her death when her mother called him at 10 in the morning. He told them that after hearing the news, he actually fainted, and it took him a very, very long time to recover. He was in such profound shock that he literally had to ask his neighbor to help him book a plane ticket and pack his suitcase. Investigators carefully checked his alibi and quickly realized he couldn't have physically traveled to Knoxville and back by that morning. So they definitively ruled him out as a suspect and naturally turned their attention to Jonia's neighbor instead. Now, unlike her boyfriend, this neighbor had no solid alibi. And he had, in fact, been inside the apartment with her, which, just immediately raised a red flag and suspicion that he might be the culprit. Jania's friends and family were also incredibly skeptical of him. Some openly thought he was the likely killer, while others accused him of just running out of the apartment and leaving Jania behind. This suspicion ran so incredibly deep that Jania's parents didn't even want him to attend her funeral. Soon after Jason was released from the hospital, investigators began questioning him. He adamantly stuck to his initial account. He said he heard screams, saw a man he didn't know, and was attacked. After he managed to fight him off, Jason stated he ran to the front door and out into the street to get help from the neighbors. He said he figured Jonia must have also managed to escape the apartment because he couldn't hear her screaming anymore. Though the police, they had some reservations, honestly, about accepting Jason's version of the story. The thing that initially raised doubts about Jason was his injuries. 7 of the 20 wounds were just superficial. And the last one on his right arm, it could have been from defending himself or, it could have been an attack. Also, investigators found no signs of a forced entry into the apartment, which kind of suggested that whoever was responsible might have already been inside. Jason claimed he had taken the trash out through the back door that night, but couldn't remember if he'd locked it or not. Detectives kept pressing him, paying close attention to which door he used to exit the apartment onto the street. Jason insisted he had left through the front door, but the police suspected he might be lying. If Jason had actually exited through the back door, it would explain the bloodstains found near the door leading to the stairs, further raising their suspicions against him. And on top of that, the police, they accused him of using and selling illegal drugs and of being aggressive when he couldn't get his fix. The young man denied all these allegations, but the investigators just kept, leveling various charges against him. After several hours at the police station, the detectives proposed a polygraph test for him. Surprisingly, Jason agreed. The investigators brought in an expert who asked him all these leading questions, and at the end of the session, they told him he had failed the test, that he was providing false answers. Man, upon hearing this, Jason became emotionally distraught, shouting that he had nothing to do with the crime, that his life was in danger, and that the real criminal was still out there. But the detectives, they remained unconvinced. But they couldn't charge him with the murder because there was no concrete evidence. They had to wait for the lab experts to complete their examination of the few pieces of evidence they found in the apartment, and a totally unexpected twist soon emerged. So during their analysis of the murder weapon, the knife, they found 3 DNA samples, one of the deceased girl, Jonia, one of Jason, and one of a man who was still unidentified. What's more, the unknown man's DNA was also found in Jonia's room, on the back door handle, and on the staircase the killer used to get out onto the street. And on top of that, they found a fingerprint on the knife handle that was marked by the victim's blood that didn't match Jason's fingerprint. These discoveries led the police to really doubt that Jason was the murderer. The evidence, it strongly indicated that another person had been in the apartment that night. However, when they checked the DNA sample against existing databases, there were just no matches. Even though investigators had ruled Jason out as a suspect, public opinion just kept casting doubt on him, accusing him of leaving his girlfriend behind and fleeing instead of protecting her. And on top of everything else, Jason started experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder. A significant development came to light soon, though. It turned out that the polygraph operator had misinterpreted the test results, and there was absolutely no indication that Jason was lying. Plus, there was no concrete evidence linking the young man to any illegal substances. It had all just been used as leverage, but more importantly, the severity of Jason's injuries had been totally underestimated. In reality, Jason had suffered serious damage to his lung and neck with little hope for a full recovery. Because of these inaccuracies in the police reports, the insurance company only covered 25% of his treatment costs, leaving Jason in a really bad financial situation. Once the police no longer considered him a suspect, they started questioning Jason as a witness. And from his account, they were able to create a kind of rough description of the attacker. The situation was complicated by the fact that Jason hadn't gotten a clear look at the assailant's face. The apartment was dimly lit, and the attacker had basically pounced on him as soon as he walked out of the room. The investigators also stumbled upon something intriguing in Jonia's room: a cap, along with some discs, and a stereo player near the back staircase. Initially, they thought these items might belong to either the victim or Jason, but Jason denied any connection to them. He said none of these items were in his apartment, suggesting they were left behind by the killer. The investigators shared a rough sketch of the suspect with the media, and after it was publicized, the police got hundreds of leads. People reported individuals who vaguely resembled the sketch, prompting detectives to chase down every one of these leads. One lead, though, it really stood out to the investigators. They found out about a group of teenagers in the area who had been breaking into houses with the intent to steal. One of these teenagers, a 19-year-old named Michael, bore a strong resemblance to the suspect's sketch. The police started looking for him, which was complicated because he was already wanted for theft. Now, with the possibility of his involvement in a murder, 2 police units joined the search for Michael. They eventually located him and brought him in for questioning. The investigators immediately focused on Michael's shoes, which had a tread pattern similar to the footprint left by the killer. They collected a DNA sample and his fingerprints and sent them to the experts for analysis. In the meantime, they interrogated him, and during this process, they got a total surprise. Michael, he quickly admitted that he and a friend had indeed entered Jonia's apartment that night. According to his story, they had planned to steal valuable items, but his friend had taken a knife and attacked Jonia. But the detectives, they soon started to doubt Michael's story. For one thing, the details he provided didn't align with the actual events. And for another, there was just no evidence that 2 strangers were at the crime scene. The lab results, they only confirmed their skepticism. Michael's DNA and fingerprints did not match those found at the murder scene. The same was true for his shoes. Oh my God. The tread pattern did not match the one in Jason's room, which, ultimately led police to the conclusion that Michael had totally fabricated his story. I mean, while it sounds crazy, false admissions like this happen pretty often in high-profile cases. Some individuals just, falsely claim guilt for various reasons, whether they're seeking attention or they're hoping for a reward for information. It's still not clear what Michael's motivation was, but his story was just completely untrue. After that, investigators interviewed over 1,000 potential suspects and gathered about 400 DNA samples, but not one of them matched the evidence. Early in the investigation, a reward was offered for information that would lead to the case being solved. As each month passed, the reward amount just increased, and by December 2005, a year after the murder, it had reached $60,000. And on top of that, the state governor, he personally put in an additional $20,000 from his own funds, which, drew even more public attention to the case. But despite all the leads, every single one of them just hit a dead end, and the case went unsolved for several years. Then, in 2007, Jonia's parents decided they had to do something, so they pushed for changes in state legislation. I mean, they couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that the murderer's fingerprints and DNA weren't in any databases. Considering how brutal the crime was, Jonia's parents just refused to believe it was the perpetrator's first offense. They later found out that, according to Tennessee laws, fingerprints and DNA samples were only collected from convicted criminals. So Jonia's parents were determined to change this. They got really involved in crafting a new law that would mandate the collection of these samples from anyone arrested for a violent crime. The authorities backed the initiative, and the law was finally enacted in May 2007. And then, just 2 months later, there was a breakthrough. The police arrested Taylor Lee Olson, a 22-year-old, for violating his probation. Olson had a long history of criminal activities, mostly theft, check forgery, and auto theft, and he had been arrested multiple times before. But what's crazy is that his fingerprints and DNA had never been collected, even with all his run-ins with the law. Olson lived with his girlfriend and their newborn daughter, but his criminal activities just never stopped. Honestly, it turned out that Olson had actually come to the investigators' attention 5 months earlier when they got a tip about his possible involvement in the murder. But for some reason, the police didn't pursue DNA samples at that time. Still, with this new arrest for probation violation, they finally decided to question him about Jonia's case. Olson eventually confessed his involvement and willingly gave a DNA sample. And when the lab results came in, it was a 100% match. Taylor's DNA was an exact match to the sample found in the victim's apartment. After that, they collected his fingerprints, which also matched the fingerprint on the murder weapon. Olson was arrested, and the detectives began their interrogation. Initially, Olson maintained his innocence, but he eventually decided to confess to what he had done. Taylor claimed that on that night, he just wanted to steal Jonia's car and had gone into her apartment through the back door to find the keys. When he entered her room, she woke up and started screaming. In response, Olson grabbed a kitchen knife and stabbed her multiple times. But he insisted that he never meant to kill anyone and that it had all just happened by accident. I mean, detectives were really doubtful about some of his details, and they were leaning toward believing that Taylor had premeditated the murder. It was possible he had been stalking the victim for a while, which was kind of supported by the fact that Jonia's friends had reported someone following her in a car. At the time, they couldn't find any evidence to prove it, but after Olson's arrest, it seemed way more plausible. Despite that, there was very little doubt about his guilt. His DNA and fingerprints were right there on the murder weapon. It was a dead giveaway. Olson's trial was set to start in mid-2008, and by that point, he had already hired a lawyer. Apparently, his legal counsel advised him to take back his confession, and Taylor presented a brand new version of events to the detectives. Now, he was claiming that he had entered Jonia's apartment with his friend, a guy named Noah Cox. According to this revised account, when Olson went into Jonia's room to get the car keys, she supposedly woke up, grabbed a knife, and stabbed him several times. Olson then fled through the back door while his friend went into the room, disarmed Jonia, and killed her. This new story really raised suspicions with the police. They found no fingerprints or DNA from anyone else at the crime scene, which made it seem totally unlikely that anyone else was involved. The detectives were just waiting for the trial to begin, but it never happened. On March 28, 2008, Taylor Olson took his own life in his prison cell. Right there with him, several suicide notes were found addressed to his family, Jonia's family, and the police. In the note to the detectives, he once again claimed that his friend Noah Cox was the actual perpetrator, and he also apologized to Jonia's family and his own. But detectives still believe that Olson was responsible for the murder and repeatedly questioned Noah. However, they found no evidence to implicate him. Jonia's parents also remained skeptical, believing that Olson was just lying. In their eyes, if Taylor was truly innocent, he wouldn't have taken his own life. It seemed way more likely that he just didn't want to spend the rest of his life in prison. On top of that, for months after his initial confession, Olson had consistently said that he went into the apartment alone and that there was no one else with him. This sudden change in his story to blame his friend just raised even more doubts.